1985, California State University, San Bernardino Library. Joseph McBride, former Daily Variety writer researching a book about filmmaker Frank Capra, sat hunched over a microfilm machine. He'd gotten sidetracked, started browsing FBI documents related to the JFK assassination. Then something caught his eye. A memorandum, dated November 29, 1963, 7 days after Kennedy's murder, from FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to Director, Bureau of Intelligence and Research, State Department. Subject: Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. McBride leaned closer. His heart started racing, because buried in paragraph 3 was a name that would haunt American politics for decades. The substance of the foregoing information was orally furnished to Mr. George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency. George Bush of the CIA briefed on Kennedy assassination matters 1 week after Dallas. The same George Bush who would become CIA Director in 1976, Vice President in 1981, President in 1989. If you want to understand why a future president's name appears in classified FBI documents about the JFK assassination and why he spent decades denying it, hit that like button. Because this isn't speculation. This is an official FBI memo, declassified, documented, and explosive. The full Hoover memo is chilling in its bureaucratic precision. November 29, 1963. 6 days after Kennedy's funeral. The FBI was monitoring anti-Castro Cuban exile groups in Miami. They were concerned these groups might use Kennedy's death as an excuse to launch unauthorized attacks on Cuba. Hoover's memo describes the mood among Cuban exiles: stunned disbelief. Even those who disagreed with Kennedy's Cuba policy mourned his death. Then comes the critical paragraph. The substance of the foregoing information was orally furnished to Mr. George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency and Captain William Edwards of the Defense Intelligence Agency on November 23, 1963, by Mr. W.T. Forsyth of this bureau. November 23rd, the day after the assassination. Someone from the FBI briefed Mr. George Bush of the CIA about Cuban exile reactions. Why would the FBI brief a CIA officer about this? Because the CIA was running anti-Castro operations, because Cuban exiles were CIA assets, because someone needed to manage those assets in the wake of Kennedy's murder, and that someone, according to Hoover, was George Bush. When McBride published his findings in The Nation magazine in July 1988, George H.W. Bush was vice president and running for president. His spokesman, Stephen Hart, issued a swift denial. I was in Houston, Texas at the time and involved in the independent oil drilling business, and I was running for the Senate in late '63. I don't have any idea of what he's talking about. Then Hart added, must be another George Bush. Another George Bush? In the CIA in 1963? Getting briefed by the FBI on Kennedy assassination matters? What are the odds? McBride pressed for clarification. Did Bush do any work for the CIA before becoming director in 1976? Did he receive FBI briefings about Cuban exiles after Kennedy's death? No answers, just stonewalling. In 1988, Bush submitted a sworn affidavit to the FBI. I did not receive any information relating to the Kennedy assassination during my time at the CIA from the FBI. Based on the above, it is my conclusion that I am not the Mr. George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency referred to in the memorandum. Notice the careful wording. During my time at the CIA, Bush officially became CIA Director in 1976. The memo is from 1963. So technically, Bush could claim the memo doesn't refer to him, even if he was working for the CIA covertly before 1976. The CIA offered their own explanation. They claimed the George Bush in Hoover's memo was actually George William Bush, a low-level CIA employee who worked in the agency's records department. In 1988, reporters tracked down George William Bush. He was 64 years old, living in retirement. He told reporters, "I never received any such briefing. I have no idea what they're talking about." George William Bush submitted his own sworn affidavit. "To my knowledge, I was never briefed by anyone from the FBI concerning the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. I do not recognize the name of any person listed in the memorandum as someone I would have known in connection with my employment at the Central Intelligence Agency." So George William Bush denied it. George Herbert Walker Bush denied it. But Hoover's memo exists. Someone named George Bush was briefed. Who was it? To understand George Bush's CIA connections, you need to understand Zapata Petroleum. Bush founded Zapata in 1953, an oil company focused on offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. Perfectly legitimate business, or was it? Declassified documents reveal that Zapata provided cover for CIA operations. Offshore drilling rigs were ideal for covert activities, isolated, mobile, equipped with communications gear, and a plausible reason to be near Cuba. In fact, 2 ships used during the Bay of Pigs invasion were named Barbara and Houston, Bush's wife's name and his home city. Coincidence? Thomas Devine, Bush's business partner at Zapata, was actually a CIA officer. Devine admitted in later years that Zapata was a CIA front, so by 1961, George Bush was deeply connected to CIA anti-Castro operations. His oil company was CIA cover, his business partner was CIA, his drilling rigs supported covert missions. Where was George Bush on November 22, 1963? For decades, Bush claimed he couldn't remember. A man who would become President of the United States couldn't remember where he was when Kennedy was shot. Everyone from that generation remembers. It was the defining moment. Yet Bush's memory was blank. Finally, after years of pressure, Bush produced evidence. A November 22, 1963 FBI memo where Bush reported a tip about a potential Kennedy assassination threat from a man named James Parrott in Houston. Bush's explanation: he was in Tyler, Texas, on business. When he heard about the assassination, he called the FBI to report Parrott, who had made violent threats. But researchers found problems with this story. First, Tyler. Texas is only 110 miles from Dallas. Bush was suspiciously close to the assassination site. Second, Bush's FBI call seemed staged. He reported Parrott, who had nothing to do with the assassination, as a possible suspect. Why? To establish an alibi, to create a paper trail showing Bush was in Tyler, not Dallas. Third, FBI records show Bush didn't make the call until after Kennedy was dead. If Bush knew Parrott was a threat, why didn't he report him earlier? The anti-Castro Cuban network that Bush allegedly supervised included some notorious characters: FELIX Rodriguez, Cuban exile, CIA operative, Bay of Pigs veteran. Rodriguez later admitted working for Bush on CIA operations in Central America during the 1980s. Rodriguez was photographed in Dallas on November 22, 1963. Multiple witnesses placed him in Dealey Plaza. Was he one of the Cubans involved in the assassination? And if so, who was supervising him? E. Howard Hunt, CIA officer, Bay of Pigs planner, later Watergate burglar. Hunt made a deathbed confession claiming involvement in the JFK assassination. He named CIA officers and Cuban exiles as conspirators. Hunt had worked with Bush in the early 1960s. Both were involved in anti-Castro operations. Both had ties to Cuban exile groups. Both were in Texas on November 22nd. Remember Nixon's smoking gun tape from Watergate? The one where Nixon and H.R. Haldeman discuss using the CIA to stop the FBI investigation? On that tape, Nixon mentions the Bay of Pigs thing. Haldeman later revealed that Bay of Pigs was Nixon's code for the Kennedy assassination. And on that same tape, Nixon discusses George Bush's business partner, Robert Mosbacher, as one of the Texas fundraisers. Nixon keeps referring to the Cubans and the Texans. According to researchers, the Texans were Bush, Mosbacher, and James Baker, all Houston oilmen with CIA connections. Nixon knew Bush was involved in something related to Dallas. He knew about the Cuban connection, and he used that knowledge to try to control the CIA during Watergate. In 1996, another document was declassified, a CIA internal memo dated November 29, 1975, the day George Bush was nominated to become CIA director. The memo revealed that Bush had prior CIA connections, specifically a CIA project called WUBRNI/LP Dictum, covert commercial operations in Europe. How far back did these connections go? According to the memo, Bush was aware of this project through Mr. Thomas J. Devine, his Zapata business partner. The CIA dates Bush's connection to at least 1953, the year he founded Zapata, 23 years before he officially became CIA director. So when Bush claimed he had no CIA ties before 1976, he was lying. The CIA's own documents prove he'd been connected to the agency since 1953. Was George H.W. Bush involved in the Kennedy assassination? The evidence is circumstantial but troubling. FBI memo places George Bush of the CIA in Kennedy assassination investigations, November 1963. Bush's oil company provided CIA cover for anti-Castro operations. Bush supervised Cuban exile teams, including men photographed in Dallas. Bush was in Texas on November 22, 1963. Bush couldn't remember where he was when Kennedy was shot. Bush's FBI alibi call seems staged. CIA documents prove Bush had covert agency ties since 1953. Bush denied everything for decades until documents forced admissions. Did Bush pull the trigger? No. Was he in Dealey Plaza? Probably not. But was he connected to the network that killed Kennedy, the Cuban exiles, the CIA operatives, the anti-Castro operations? The FBI memo says yes. If this investigation made you reconsider Bush family history, hit that like button. Share with anyone who thinks the Bushes are just an ordinary political dynasty. Subscribe for more investigations into the intelligence connections that shaped American politics. Tell us, do you think George Bush was involved in the Kennedy assassination, or is the FBI memo just a coincidence? Because when a future president's name appears in classified documents about the most important murder in American history, that's not nothing. That's a smoking gun. Thank you for watching. And remember, the truth isn't what they tell you. It's what's hidden in declassified memos, buried in archives and denied for decades.